Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Richard Skipper Celebrates. For those of you who have been here before, you know that I'm all about celebrating artists and their body of worth. And today I'm very excited about this celebration because it's all about this book, What Do You Do with a Chocolate Jesus? That's the question of the day. Now, some of you may have thought about this in the past. Maybe some of you are going to start pondering it right now. But one of the things that I have loved about this series since I started doing this in March, that it's taken me down many different paths. And Thomas Quinn, who is a two-time Emmy-nominated documentarian who has uncovered all kinds of wonderful things, has written this incredible book. And as soon as I started reading this book, I said I had to have him on this show. Now, before I bring Thomas on, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my own evolution. I grew up in Conway, South Carolina, and I grew up in the Methodist Church. I was a good little Southern boy, and every Sunday I would get up. We lived next door to a church. Interestingly enough, I live across the street from two churches now, but I grew up and I would get up. My parents didn't go to church when I was growing up, and I would get up and I would get dressed and I would go to church every Sunday. Now, my first images of Jesus is this image right here. This was in my grandmother's house, and I grew up with this image always looking down at us over the dining room table and everywhere. And as I got a little bit older, I discovered Jesus in the movies. And this, of course, is Jeffrey Hunter in The Greatest Story Ever Told. When I was in grammar school, elementary school, for those of you who don't know the term grammar school, I almost got kicked out of school because I brought the recording of Jesus Christ Superstar to our school. And I got in big trouble. I was called into the principal's office and I was told that this was a very blasphemous interpretation of Jesus. And of course, we can see that Jesus has been celebrated in popular culture. And of course, that brings us to the chocolate diva. The chocolate Jesus. Now, I said chocolate diva because I have a dear friend named Peggy Eason, and she calls herself the chocolate diva. But today, we're going to be celebrating the chocolate Jesus. And Thomas, first of all, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Richard.
And this book, I have to tell you, from the moment that I picked this book up and started reading it, you're a great writer. Let's start there. But I think you've missed your calling somewhat as well, because every single paragraph, for the most part, had me rolling on the floor at some of the absurdities of the things that I was reading and everything. But before we delve into this, we are living in this crazy world of COVID right now. And I want to know, how are you doing really in the midst of all this?
I'm actually doing pretty well. My concern really is more for other people than it is for me. I did end up getting unemployed as a result of COVID because, as you mentioned, I'm a documentary writer, producer. I do shows for Discovery Channel, History Channel, Science Channel, those guys. And the company I was working for the past 4 years, Circle the Globe Productions, they produce a show called Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates. And he goes around the world looking for lost treasures and lost civilizations and things like that, mammoth tusks in Siberia and whatnot. And we all follow him there. And, he does these explorations. And unfortunately, it's such a travel adventure-oriented show that as soon as travel became banned back in March, it just killed the show. And so we never even got this. This would have been my 5th season. We never even got that started. And so I ended up deciding to take this time. It's like, well, if I'm going to be forced out of work, and a lot of the other shows, I had a couple other opportunities, but I wasn't really crazy about the particular shows they were on. And so I just decided to take time off and work on a feature project of my own that I've been working on for some time with someone else, and I can't really discuss that. But I've had that project, and I've done some odds and ends things, including working briefly on the Discovery Shark Week show this summer.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, it didn't air because the sharks didn't show up.
And if they did, I hope they're wearing masks.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, we got to talk to their union. But anyway, so it's been sort of a piecemeal project work, but I've been trying to sort of actually use this time as an excuse to work on a couple of things that I had on the back burner while I was working full time for other companies. So it's actually been beneficial to me in that way.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask you, have you ever thought of turning this book into a documentary?
Well, actually, originally, when I started putting the book together, the original thought was to do a documentary film.
Because I can see it unfolding as I'm reading it.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to write it and host it, and the whole bit. But the problem is that, number one, it's a lot of money and a lot of time to produce even a small documentary, and secondly, there was so much that I had to say that you just couldn't fit it into a 2-hour film. So I just started writing what I wanted to get out of my system. I had spent 30 years listening to evangelicals talk and politicians talk about what the Bible says and what it supposedly means and all this. And I myself went through a brief born-again period shortly after college. And so the book was written kind of in a response to both that experience, what I went through over a year, and also as a response to all this talk about how America is based on Christian values and a lot of the false information from evangelicals and fundamentalists about what the Bible actually says. And so it was kind of built up over 30 years, and I sat down and just decided to take a few months off from work and write it out, and ended up with this book.
Now, there are so many layers to this book. I mean, you give an incredible history of Christianity in, if you don't mind my saying so, almost an irreverent way of looking at things.
It's definitely irreverent.
Yes, but I
do it with Jersey attitude.
Jersey attitude is what I love about the book.
Also, there was a strategy there too, which is that there are a lot of books that dissect the Bible and disparage what it says or corrects what it says at least, but they often tend to be kind of either very academic and dry, or they tend to be very angry. Mm-hmm. And I'm not either one of those things. And I found it was an endless source of humor because of the irony, the absurdity. And so I decided to go for kind of a George Carlin Jersey attitude approach to the whole thing. And that way you can read about these irreverent things and these things you didn't know about the religion. It's all true, but it's done with a kind of sense of humor so that it kind of disarms you a little bit. It makes it fun. It doesn't make it a tedious chore to read, which usually is the deal when you're reading about religion or history. Now,
did you grow up in a religious household?
Not particularly. I grew up in, what I thought was a typical Christian household, which is my mother was Catholic, mm-hmm. My father was Protestant. They sent me to a year of Methodist Sunday school, and that was in 8th grade. I think it was too late by then. But we were not regular churchgoers, mm-hmm. So it didn't take. I did say the Lord's Prayer every night right up through high school. So, we celebrated Christmas with trees and Easter with eggs and that sort of thing. But that's pretty much as far as the religion thing went for me growing up.
Now, I have a question for you. Why, in your own mind, why do you think that people have such a hard time finding the humor in their religion?
Well, for a lot of people, it's the most serious thing in their life. And for a lot of people, it may be the only thing in their life. Some people are in such terrible straits that religion and religious belief is all they have. Mm-hmm. And so, that's what makes it, I think, such an enduring and a powerful thing, is the fact that when all else is lost, you can at least believe in God, and there is always hope. And so, you have mixed feelings about sort of dissecting something like that because you don't want to take away people's sense of hope. At the same time, you don't want to be condescending and say, well, let the little folks, have their mythical beliefs if it gives them hope. I like debunking nonsense. A lot of the shows I've done, I give humorous talks as well, and I debunk things like conspiracy theories and alien visitations and some of these sort of crazy things that you hear about, miracles and medical miracles and so forth. And a lot of my shows, I've worked with the amazing Randy and with other skeptics like that to sort of deconstruct these things. And religion was simply another thing in that direction.
Now, as I'm reading the book, I'm reminded of the old Indian fable about the six blind men and the elephant. And if you know the fable,
Sure.
each of the men come up and they touch a different part of the elephant, and they each have a different experience of what that elephant is like. And I had, reading this book, I'm thinking, depending on what path each person is on as they're reading this book, will also shade how they respond to the book.
Yeah.
And the book was originally written 10 years ago. And take us back to that time and the climate. I think that if I remember correctly, Michelle Bachmann was running for president. All these crazy things were going on. And of course, evangelism. Am I saying that right?
Evangelism.
Evangelism. Yes. I know it sounded funny. People are so driven by their beliefs, and where we are right now in this culture, it's truly dividing our country because a lot of people are operating from their religious views. And their religious views, let's face it, come out of what they've been taught. So if you can just take us back to the time frame when you first sat down to write the book.
Sure. It was around 2010. And Obama had just been elected a couple of years before, and I think the Tea Party was emergent at the time. And the Tea Party often, cited themselves as fervent Christians, traditional Christians, even though their policies seemed to be anything but. And that's one of the reasons I was inspired to do that. You did have folks like Michelle Bachmann around, and I remember her saying something along the lines of, "God told me to run for president." Right? Mm-hmm. Well, there's a commandment against taking the Lord's name in vain. And I think that commandment was written for folks like that. I don't think it was written for people who hammered their nut thumb with a hammer and cursed a blue streak. I think it was for people who invoke the name of God for every decision they make. And that way, when people say, well, God told me to do this, or God tells me that this is the right value, it's kind of a way of
one of the lines, one of the lines that just had me chuckling out loud in the book, when you talk about all the wars and everything that have happened under the name of God. And of course, perhaps God just closes his eyes on that particular commandment as these things start to unfold.
Yes. Yeah, well, right. He gave Moses the 10 commandments and said, don't kill, don't steal, don't covet. And then they go to the promised land, the land of Canaan, and they kill and steal and covet everything in sight. So I think you should have put the commandments after they got that business done with instead of before. Little organizational thing. It's part of actually a lecture I do called God Needs Therapy, which shows that the God of the Old Testament is actually a rather angry, vengeful guy who keeps screwing up. And eventually has a transformation that takes place that turns him into the God of the New Testament.
Well, again, when I was growing up as a kid, I remember they would have these revival meetings. Again, I grew up in the South, and these revival meetings would happen twice a year. And I would go home and I would have nightmares based on the films that they showed in the school and these lessons that they were imparting on us. Now, you mentioned earlier that there was a period in your life where you became a born-again Christian. And where did that fall in your life in relation to the book that you wrote?
Oh, that was, it really got me started on the path that eventually led to the book about 25 years later. This was about a year, right after I graduated college. And I explained this in the introduction to the book.
Yes.
And that a friend of mine, that was like a high school party buddy, invited me down to Florida to visit him and to go to a Christian revival fair. And it was such a shock to me at the time that a born again, a close party buddy of mine could become a born again Christian. This was something I only saw on television. And so I went down and visited him, and he took me to one of these revival meetings. They have big white tents and all where people are in there witnessing on how God had saved their marriages or healed their wounds or warned them away from liberal congressmen or whatever. And, inside the tent, they had a lot of, rock bands and tchotchkes for sale, including a hand-sized portrait of Jesus made of chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of got me on the path of asking questions like, well, what do you do with a chocolate Jesus? Do you work your way up the legs or go right for the halo? Do you eat it? Do you worship it? Do you save it or share it with 12 friends as the last dessert?
Does it melt your hands?
Exactly. Is it like the Eucharist, where it turns into the flesh of Christ when it touches your lips? And if so, does that make it okay for a low-carb diet? So it started me down the path of kind of irreverently questioning all of these things. So I did the genuine research, but I still had a very tongue-in-cheek, dry-eyed attitude towards all of it. And I read about it and learned about it over the years. And finally, it just built up over 25 years. And by the way, his conversion caused me, I was kind of a seeker at the time. I tried transcendental meditation and chanting and all these different things while I was in college. But I had not tried regular old-fashioned Christian religion. So I figured I'd try that, and I plunged into it with both feet, and went through an emotional experience that felt like being born again. And the problem was that it was fun for a while, but then after a while it seemed like an ill fit. I was being asked to just deny too many rational parts of my brain, and I was also being asked to overlook too many factual errors and illogical things about Scripture and so forth. And so it's like, what made these folks any smarter than me when it came to this kind of stuff? And so I started doing my own research and gradually pulled out of it, precisely because, people ask me, how can you write about Christianity if you're an atheist or an agnostic? And it's because I know so much about it and spent 25 years studying it that I became basically an atheist. That's what led me eventually to write the book.
Mm-hmm. Now, going back to that period, can you talk about what the process was for you becoming a born-again Christian, what that meant for you, how that eventually changed your life, and how those that you were the closest to responded to what you were going through? I know that's a lot of questions in one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was kind of a solitary thing because I had just moved from Midwestern University to San Francisco at the time. San Francisco is not exactly the town you generally get born again in.
You beat me to the punch.
And so it was kind of a lone experience for me in that sense. But I decided to just kind of logically explore it. I would read the Bible every night. I'd read books about the Bible. I joined a little Jesus group. I went to a different church somewhere in the Bay Area every Sunday, looking for one that spoke to me, one that seemed to click. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up I went to a Black Baptist church in Oakland and tried to be very low key. But as like the only white guy there, that was kind of tough, especially when the minister says, "Well, everybody who's new here, please stand up," and it's like, okay, there goes my cover. But it was but it was a great joyous atmosphere. I really liked that church because it was just a lot of fun. But it was a little too down home cooking for my taste, from a kid from New Jersey. And I eventually came across, and then I went to this wonderful Catholic church, St. Mary's in San Francisco, an old Catholic church. But it was so dry and ritualistic and humorless, and it was sort of the IBM of religion, And so I ended up going to this. I don't know if it was a Presbyterian church, I think, and it was on Mother's Day, and it was a woman minister giving the sermon. And I thought, well, wait a minute now. The 1 Corinthians 13 says, "Let your women not speak in the churches, for it is shameful for them to speak." How can this woman not only be speaking in church, but be a minister? And so I talked to her after the service, and she put an hour aside for me. And she explained to me she was not a fundamentalist, which I had no idea what a fundamentalist was at the time. I thought you were just either a Christian or you're not. And she eventually kind of saved me because I was like going nuts with this kind of stuff and fearing hellfire and had a pain in my chest and losing sleep over it and all that because I felt like my rational mind was at war with my faith side. And she explained to me that you don't have to always go head over heels into the faith the way some folks do. And gradually, it weaned me back to being myself. And it turns out that myself was not really a believer in mystical things. And that includes resurrections and boats that carry all the animals in the world, and talking snakes. So,
And how long did that process last for you?
it was about a year-long process, but both going in and going out. And friends of mine were actually very tolerant and very forgiving of me. I did have a Jewish girlfriend I had to give up sex with, which broke my heart.
Which is mentioned in the book as well.
Yeah, right. Although we remain friends to this day, so all is forgiven.
That's great. And when you sat down and decided that when this idea, what was the beyond the chocolate Jesus? What was the spark that convinced you to sit down and write the book?
I think it was, I had been collecting essays and things that I had been writing for years. And I just sort of had a folder that I put this stuff away in. Just arguments for and against and whatever about certain passages, about certain characters and whatnot. And I would hear a story on the news and I'd go, no, that's not right. And I'd sit down and write my response to it, when some minister would get up there or a priest would get up there and inaccurately reflect things. And so at a certain point, I just decided I had this in me, and I made enough money doing the documentary stuff where let me just take 6 months, 8 months off and get this out of my system. And I ended up writing 2 books, one about the Old Testament and one in the New Testament. And it was actually one big book, and it was 200 or 600 pages long. And at the time I had a book agent, and she says, you cannot write a humor book 600 pages long. You can't do that. So I split it into 2, an Old Testament one called God, the Unauthorized Biography, and then the new one, which is What Do You Do with the Chocolate Jesus? And that's about the New Testament. The Old Testament one, I think, needs a complete rewrite, so it's not out there right now. But one of these days, I hope to get to that one.
So what was your process? There's a lot of history in the book. Were you always attracted to history, and was a lot of the knowledge already there, or did you find yourself totally immersing yourself into this new world?
I knew a lot about history, particularly American history, which is another one of the topics I talk about. I didn't really know a whole lot about the religious history. And so it was really a discovery process for me. It was not like going over old stuff. I would look into familiar tales and stories and whatever, and then I would read books about the Bible. Some of them were reinforcing of it, and some of them were, critical of it, or they were academic works. And the academic works were the most useful. The problem is they were academic works. They were boring. They were dry. And I knew that most people would never hear these arguments or hear this evidence because they were, kind of specialized books. So I tried to write a popular book about all this stuff, and that way making it funny and making it laugh out loud. That's the compliment I get most often, which is it's a lot harder to write humor than it is to write history. So the fact that you laughed at it is a great compliment to me. But yeah, I wanted to make it palatable to a general audience rather than just scholars.
And how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, the 2 books together took me about 8 months to write. And then I split it in half and did a rewrite over another couple of months. So probably about maybe 4 or 5 months on that particular book.
And I like to ask writers this question. When did you know that this book was, for lack of a better term, completed? Because I don't think it is completed.
I had a plan. And so I knew what I wanted to cover and I outlined it. And I put in the stuff that I had been collecting for years in it and rewrote it and polished it, and then filled in the blank spaces with additional study. And so once I had my whole plan, once I figured out I had the whole basic story covered, that's when my sense was it was finished.
Now I want to go back to, because a lot of people who did not, like I said, I grew up in a Methodist household. So born again is a way of life for a lot of people. And you went through that whole process as well. What does born again mean to you?
Well, born again is kind of a metaphor that Jesus used and others use, which basically means a kind of reconstruction of yourself. All of us are filled with insecurities or guilt or things we'd like to be better about ourselves. And one of the attractive things about Christianity is that it preaches that you should be your most perfect self. And so that's a great aspiration. But we always try and improve ourselves, but just doing it on our own is so tough. And so it helps to have a structure. And I think this is one of the reasons why everybody from Tony Robbins to, Scientologists become popular. It's because they offered a sort of prefabricated way of reconstructing yourself. We want to be instantly reformed and make myself a better person, hopefully before lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And being born again is kind of that. It's a way for square people to get high, and just allow them to transfer form and see the world anew and see themselves anew. And hopefully by coming from a different place, they will be a different person and relate to people differently and earn their way into the kingdom of God.
And if you'll pardon the expression, it's a heavy cross to bear. To try to...
It's a very heavy cross to bear, yes.
Yes, to live up to that level. As you were starting, did you feel that this was a process you were going through? Or did you feel that this was something that instantly happened? And guess what, everybody? I'm born again.
Well, my impression was that it was just an instantaneous thing. You were born again and suddenly all questions were asked. You had no more doubts. You were a believer. And while I went through a brief period like that, it didn't last forever, even though I joined a group and these groups helped to reinforce that idea. One of the reasons why you go to church, or one of the reasons why you join groups like this, is precisely because I don't think it's totally natural for the human mind to believe in faith first. Mm-hmm. I believe it's natural to have faith and to believe and always have hope. But I believe the human mind is essentially rational. And that when you go against that too dogmatically, you're going against human nature. And I think that America's founders felt the same way. Didn't mean they weren't religious, but they also believed in the laws of nature and in Newton's laws of physics. And they weren't about to suspend those ideas in order to believe that the earth was 6,000 years old, or that, Noah fit every animal in the world on there. Thomas Jefferson questioned all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So the founders, America's founders, were not fundamentalists. Mm-hmm. And, they were believers, but they were believers in their own as well, Yeah. So.
And going back to, an earlier question that I asked, did you, when that process happened, did you come out shouting from the rooftops that you were born again? Or did you slowly start to bring that into the way you lived your life?
It was more the second. It was more the way I started just relating to people. I didn't stand out on street corners and start with signs saying, honk if you love Jesus. I don't think Jesus wants you to honk. I don't think he wants, it's not necessary to have mass gatherings in, a titanium tabernacle big enough to be seen from orbit. I think that's a showy form of religion. He says, go into a room and shut the door and pray as if nobody's watching. That's what it counts. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not somebody who's anti-Jesus. I happen to like Jesus. I happen to like his philosophy a lot.
Well, you spend a lot of time with him.
Yeah, a lot of time with him. I don't quite buy into the philosophy that he's the son of the creator of the universe and he's coming back every day to fix everything, any day to fix things. But I do believe that he contributed a lot of wisdom and knowledge. And unfortunately, one of the problems that I have with a lot of our diehard Christian friends is that they seem anything but Christian. They seem to me in many ways the least Christian people in my experience.
Thank you. The
fundamentalist agenda, particularly politically, is not about, freeing people. It's about banning things. Their whole agenda is to ban rights and freedoms that we now have. They want to ban abortion, ban contraception, ban labor unions, ban gay marriage, ban evolution in schools, ban studies of gun regulation, or ban environmental regulations. There's just all kinds of things they want to ban because they know God best? I don't believe that.
I consider myself a very spiritual person in terms of the way that I live my life. But as I've gotten older, I have a huge problem with organized religion. And it's very much based on what you've just described going through this. But I find that for myself, I also lead a very full life. And I'm too busy leading my life to be concerned about what other people are doing or not doing in their own lives. Yeah. And again, based on everything that you've read and, and going down this path, and of course we're speaking in generalities, but don't you find that most people who get that far down the rabbit hole are missing those very qualities from their life of completeness?
Oh yes, yeah. I think too often the more loudly righteous of us don't do what Jesus intended, which is to clean up your own little act and concentrate on yourself, and stop trying to clean up everybody else's act. Especially, and that especially goes with when you try to use the force of law. Too often, when they want to convert you and you say no, thank you, they stop making good arguments and start passing bad laws. And we live in a country that is not in the business of enforcing the will of God. It's there to enforce the will of the American people, which is a very different thing. And so I don't know what your original question, your original point was.
The fact that people who don't have that completeness in their life, that they use this as a crux to go through life.
Yeah, well, you can use it to lean on. I think that's perfectly fine. The problem is, excuse me, when you try to clean up somebody else's act and try to shape somebody else's life according to your beliefs. If you believe, say you believe abortion is morally wrong. Okay, there's nothing in the Bible that bans abortion, by the way, but or that says that life begins at conception. But if you want to extract from Scripture that kind of message,
or that Jesus was born on December 25th.
Right, exactly. If you want to do the theological gymnastics that it takes to get an anti-abortion message out of the Bible, fine, you're free to do so. I would not try to change your opinion. Shout it from the rooftops. Try and convince everybody of your view. No problem there. But when you start writing laws based on this kind of stuff, there's where you cross the line. And it's like, well, okay, if you're going to write a law based on this book, let's take a real close look at what this book actually says. And that was part of the inspiration for what I decided to do. And that way people can look at the book and see what it's generally trying to say, rather than using it as a sort of shield to justify everything that I personally think. When people think that, it's not me that thinks it, it's God that thinks it, it's a way of saying, hey, it's not just my opinion, it's God's opinion. So you can't really disagree with me. And that's kind of the Michelle Bachmann approach, I think.
Exactly. Well, it's the approach of many, especially nowadays. Now, again, when you wrote this book 10 years ago, and did you have a hard time selling this book?
No, I didn't. I thought that I'd get a lot more grief, and a lot more criticism from that. And in fact, I didn't. It was, not that difficult. I've gotten surprisingly little opposition, hopefully because the humor in it kind of defangs the argument a bit there and makes it less angry and more palatable. So no, I didn't have any problems with censorship or anything like that. No.
What was the overall response when the book first came out?
Generally, it was positive. I got a lot of interviews, and people were very open to the ideas that I expressed. A number of the ideas I expressed them in ways that you usually don't hear on television, or I addressed issues that you never hear at all. Such as the one I mentioned, that abortion is not banned anywhere in the Bible, which is surprising news to some. Or that the Constitution is not based on the 10 Commandments. In fact, 7 of the 10 Commandments are unconstitutional. So therefore, you can't say it's based on 10 Commandments. These sort of things that are sort of givens that everybody just kind of accepts as part of the conversation. No, they're absolutely wrong. And it's part of the fun of kind of popping the balloons a little bit. I have a little mischievous fun in doing that sort of thing.
What surprised you most about yourself writing the book?
How much of the philosophy of Jesus I actually liked, and thought that, boy, if we all lived that way, we'd be in a lot better shape. And the supernatural part of it, again, is the part that I don't buy into. But in terms of,
well, I want to ask you, was there a defining moment in your life where you stopped believing, because obviously you did believe at one point, or did that come about as a result of the research that you did on the book?
No, I was skeptical about it even before I went through this experience, just growing up. I always I believed in the philosophy more than in the philosopher. And I think what happened was, beginning with St. Paul, the first great Christian evangelist, is that he turned a philosophy of Jesus into a philosophy about Jesus and made it more of a cult, made it more about worshiping Jesus than more about the philosophy that he taught.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and in a way, it was very effective, because one of the reasons I think why Christianity is very popular and why it spreads easily is because it makes the idea of God accessible.
Mm-hmm.
God is less like in the Jewish tradition or in the Muslim tradition, where he's this awesomely high, unattainable perfection, that's up there somewhere, and hope someday you can, grab a little piece of that divinity. Jesus is your big brother, he's your pal. You hang with him, you talk to him. I met people back in my born again days who would consult Jesus before deciding how much to charge people for their upholstery repair business. There was no matter too trivial that you couldn't get Jesus to consult with about. Mm-hmm. And so, that's how it factored in for me in the early days.
Well, if you were skeptical about these beliefs, what was it that eventually pulled you through the door?
Well, as I said, I was kind of a seeker in college, and I was trying all these different philosophies and studying them and trying to immerse myself in them, looking for a higher truth. And thought that, it really would have been remiss for me to try all these sort of marginal, trendy, new agey kind of things, and not try the basic mainstream philosophy that most Americans bought into. And so I decided to go into it. And it can be intoxicating. There is wonderful rhetoric there. You have to remember, the Bible is a piece of work that's been written and rewritten and polished for 2,000 years. So they got it down, Mm-hmm. And there are passages that are just some of the most beautiful ever written. Mm-hmm. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him shall never die but have eternal life. Brings you to tears. It's utter nonsense, but it is touching. And so I think Christianity has the best metaphors. You die with me and you get reborn with me if you believe in me, and you can live forever, and forgiveness is your first impulse towards other people. These sort of things are wonderful. And if we all practice them, it would be terrific. The problem is, of course, we don't all practice them. And the people who seem to practice them at the least are the people who scream Jesus the most.
Mm-hmm. Now, going back to when you wrote this book, obviously a lot of it is history, but have your thoughts or beliefs evolved at all since you first wrote these words down on paper?
No, they're pretty much, I reread the book every once in a while.
Well, that was going to be my next question, if you've gone back and reread it again.
Oh yeah, I've reread the book, 20 times. If for no other reason to look for typos. Every once in a while,
do you still find any?
I've caught one or two, yes.
Okay.
But generally, I reread them in part because I kind of read them and to re-inspire myself to, if I have to write about something like that, and I'll read some parts and think, say, that was pretty good. That was, not so bad. So I reinforce myself that way. But I also do it to just double check and make sure that nothing's gone too stale. I may have to go back and do a revision just to update some of the jokes. I think there's a Dick Cheney joke in there somewhere. So I have to go back and update it there.
Even though your beliefs are what they are, do you enjoy the pageantry of the church? Do you ever go to church services, or is that something that is completely compartmentalized for you?
No, I almost never go to church services. But when I travel, I go to cathedrals and ashrams and places of worship all the time, because the energy and the imagination and the work that people put into these places when these were the high priority. Mm-hmm. For 1,000 years in Europe, the church was the highest priority, was the greatest power in the land. And so you go into these cathedrals and they're masterworks of architecture, of art, of, you can just learn so much about Western civilization by learning the history of art. And the history of art is very much connected with the history of religion. You go to the Vatican, and of course, that's a whole lesson in art. I'm not crazy about the art style of the Vatican because it's mostly Baroque, mm-hmm. Which is sort of an extremely ornate, kind of a melodramatic artistic style. It's as if the way I describe it in the book is as if your Aunt Tessie that makes doilies decided to decorate her apartment with the budget of the Pentagon. And so it's so overwrought. But it is fascinating, just to zoom in on this stuff and look at it and study it. And so, to me, places of worship, icons of worship, rituals, things like that are fascinating to me on a kind of sociological level. And that's where sort of the documentary producer writer of me comes in, learning why people do different things that I may consider bizarre. Why do they dance with poisonous snakes? To prove that they're immune from death because the Lord is protecting them. Turns out that isn't always true, but they're believers.
Now, is there one particular area of history or the Bible, if you will, as you were researching, that you really immersed yourself in the most, that you were the most attracted to?
A lot of the interest to me, one of the most fascinating parts was the stuff that led up to Christianity. One of the early chapters of the book, it lists about a half a dozen sort of pagan prequels to the Christian faith. And it shows that, excuse me, the idea of a sort of divine God-man born to the earth who dies and is resurrected and does miracles and healings and is coming back someday to save the world and so forth. This idea did not begin with Jesus, that he, in fact, was one of the last guys to come down with this idea, and that there were people like Attis and Osiris and others that go all the way back to ancient Egypt that have very similar life and death resurrection stories. And a lot of the ideas that you find in Christianity are found in some cases almost word for word in these earlier myths. And I'm not saying that Christianity necessarily swiped these ideas from those myths, but boy, it sure looks like that. And it looks like
our religions are basically the same thing. The golden rule: do unto others as you have them do unto you. And somewhere along the way, people seem to forget that.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you a spiritual person at all?
Not particularly. And I'm one of those few people who actually say that, not particularly. Almost everybody says, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. No, I'm not particularly spiritual. And what I mean by that is, it doesn't mean that I don't think about myself and my soul or my inner life. It doesn't mean I don't think about philosophy. I think about that a lot. But I don't think of it, when I hear the word spiritual, I take it literally in terms of disembodied spirits and entities and ghost-like things, angels, demons, whatever. That's what I think of as spiritual. I think that's the more literal definition. And I'm not a believer in that sort of thing.
And what's the biggest takeaway that you would hope that people would come away with after reading your book? Or do you even think about that?
No, I do think about it. I think the biggest takeaway is that we ought to be a little bit more humble when we start declaring eternal truth and what we think is eternal truth. Because often what we regard as eternal truth really isn't. For instance, people will say, well, if you don't base your morals and values on a belief in God, then they can morph and evolve and change into anything. And that's absolutely true. But the other side of that argument is that if you do base your morals and values on a belief in God, your values can change every bit as much. Because you think about it, 300 years ago, if you asked a Catholic priest, what's the best form of government? He would have said, well, a Christian monarchy, of course, preferably a Catholic monarch. Today, the answer would be a pagan idea called democracy. 300 years ago, slavery was practiced and endorsed by both the Catholic and the Protestant religions. Today, it's a crime against humanity. 300 years ago, women's equality was an outrage. Today, it's a right. 300 years ago, free speech and free press could get you thrown in jail. Today, they're all American virtues. And 300 years ago, freedom of religion, of course, was blasphemy. It was heresy. You could end up getting burned at the stake. Whereas today, it's a basic American right. And these are not trivial issues. These are fundamental cornerstone civilization-defining issues. And the Christian world has done a complete 180 on all of them just in the past 300 years, never mind the previous 2,000. So the idea that if you're subscribing to this religion, that you're planting your, flag of morality in the unmoving soil of eternal truth, not so. The eternal truth turns out to be not so eternal.
Now, I'm going to ask a stupid question. It's going to quote. But do you think any progress has been made at all since your book was written?
Yeah, I do. I think slowly, I mean, in government, obviously, we still have very organized, very intrusive religious groups who are not happy with God working things out. They want the Congress to do it too.
Mhm.
But by and large, I think things are moving slowly in the right direction in that while atheism is still highly unpopular, more and more people are willing to admit it than ever before. I think there's something like 15% of the American public regards themselves as either agnostic or atheist, which is basically they don't really think in spiritual terms or supernatural terms. And 15%, that's more people than are Jewish or Muslim or Asian religions. That's more people than are Hindu. That's roughly the percentage of the population that's African American. That's a pretty big minority, but there's no atheist caucus in the Congress. You know.
Well, do you think of atheism as a belief system, just like Christianity is a belief system?
No, atheism is not a belief system, really. Atheism, I mean, atheists tend to think scientifically. You know, they tend to believe in the laws of nature and a scientific view of the universe. But atheism is not joining something or a belief system. Atheism is more like, you know, say almost everybody belonged to a country club. You know, the Christian country club and the Jewish country club and the Muslim country club. And they ask, well, what country club do you belong to? And I'd say, I don't belong to the atheist country club. I just don't belong to a country club. And so it's the lack of subscribing to any particular system. That's what atheism is.
Well,
and really, I've heard this said many times, we're all atheists in every religion except our own. So I'm just an atheist in one more religion than most other people.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Well, if you are a fundamentalist Christian, you don't really believe in the Jewish God or the Muslim God. You don't believe in Allah, right? You're an atheist when it comes to Allah, whereas you're a theist when you come to Christian God.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, you basically, everybody's a non-believer in every religion except the religion they believe in.
And, you know, and you bring up a very interesting point there. We live in a culture that, you know, if someone believes in God and they want to put to the forefront that, you know, all of us, you know, I'm a liberal and we, you know, and they want to put this swath across all of us that we believe a certain way, that we think a certain way, that we act a certain way, which is not, you know, as black and white as people want to make it. On either side. But the fact that so many people, you know, if their belief is so strong that if you are an atheist, that you are wrong to be an atheist.
Sure. Well, I can understand feeling that you're wrong to be an atheist if you're a true believer in a God and somebody doesn't believe in that God. You know, that I think everybody kind of feels that way. But it's, I don't know, if somebody feels wrong that you're an atheist, they're assuming, and I think this is one reason why it's so unpopular, they assume you don't have any morals or values. You know, they assume that you have to believe in a God in order to have any kind of standards or morals or values. And that's absolutely not true. The founders of Western civilization, Greeks and the Romans, they invented democracy, they invented science, they invented free debate. They did not take their gods seriously at all. They were the gods of Mount Olympus, which was a pretty randy bunch. And they didn't take their gods seriously, and yet the Greeks invented the discipline of ethics. The Romans invented the legal system. They were people who did have ethics and morals and values. Some of them were different than our own. Many of them were the same. But the fact is they based them on philosophy and on an understanding of man and an understanding of the world, not on a belief in God. And the founders of America actually were the same way. They did believe in the Bible. They were raised in a Christian culture, certainly. But the revolutionary step they took, one of them, was to embrace the Enlightenment of the 18th century. It's something most people never study in school. And it's where reason came to the Christian world and where the scientific revolution really took hold of political philosophy. And so if you believe in democracy, there's nothing about democracy in the Bible. God never says to establish a democracy. It's a word found nowhere in the Bible. It's a system of government invented 5 centuries before Jesus was born. So it's a form of government that owes nothing to the Bible. Democracy comes out of an understanding that man is a rational animal, that he needs freedom in order to exercise his reason, and that the best form of government to assure his individual liberty to use his reason would be democracy, a form of government where he gets to choose the leader. It's a form of government that is the direct opposite of all the Christian governments of the Middle Ages, where power and authority did not come upwards from the people, as in a democracy, it came downwards from heaven. It was assumed that God gave the king his job. And as long as the king ruled in the name of God and observed the commandments, he was the rightful lord of the realm. America's founders took that and threw it all out the stained glass window and said, nope, God's not involved in this government thing anymore. People will make the decision there.
Wow. Well, I mean, there's a lot to digest in this book. It's incredible. Thank you. I didn't hear what you said.
I said it's funny.
It is very funny.
People want to
entertain out loud. I mean, just the quotes on the back are enough to get people to buy it. My favorite quote here is, I keep coming back to it again and again. The Buddha.
What can you say?
I still hope that there's a documentary out there, because I think it would make a great, great documentary film.
Yeah, I would like to do it. I know that Bill Maher some years ago came up with Religionists, and I thought there were parts of that movie that really hit it and were spot on. I thought some of it was sort of off the subject, but I'd like to do something like that someday, or maybe like a mini series or something like that would just sort of walk us through the whole history and have fun with it at the same time.
And of course, none of us know what the path ahead of us is right now with everything that's going on. But what is next for you, or do you have any plans on what you want to get back to as soon as we are able to rejoin the human race once again?
Well, I am always looking for another documentary project to write or to produce, but it's got to be something that I'm interested in. I can afford to be a little fussy about what I take these days. So, it's got to be something I'm interested in. I also do some of my own little video editing and shooting and whatever for private videos, just kind of a little sideline during the COVID period. And that way you don't have to travel with a 9-man crew and wait 2 weeks to get quarantined and whatnot. And I'm also working on this feature project, like I say, that I'm keeping mum for the moment. That takes up a lot of time. So I've got a couple of things that I'm more than enough to do right now. And so I'm hoping that will eventually turn into a feature script and then also more documentary work.
Let's hope so. I want to ask, when you do a documentary film, just to go in that direction for a moment, do you start with an outline, or does it evolve as you go along?
Well, usually when I'm assigned a subject from a company or a network to say, okay, we're going to do a show about this. And then my job is to start doing research, find out who the experts are, find out the places to go, the coolest stuff to shoot, all that. And once I find all that, then I'll write up an outline and get it approved. And once they approve it or make what changes they want, then I'll write out a more fleshed out treatment, a detailed summary of the whole thing, and then they'll approve that. And then finally, I'll write up a script that we use as the basis for shooting.
Now, I want to ask you, and I'm paraphrasing one of the things that you bring up in the book, but how does this book define you?
I think it's a subject that's just close to my heart because it did hit me hard in my youth, when I was right out of school. And it just seems also to be one of those subjects that, just not enough people get out there and tell the truth. There's more about it that's coming out that's truthful in the last decade or so. So things have improved, but there's still an awful lot of BS out there about it. And unfortunately, the ones with the most persuasive BS seem to have the reins of power too often. And I think what we have to do is get people to say, look, believe what you want to believe, but, draw the line at passing laws. Religion is only real religion when it's practiced in your own heart and mind. It's not religion when it's forced upon you. That's just oppression.
So I know it's been at least 10 years since you were presented with the chocolate Jesus. So if I was to send you a chocolate Jesus now, would you know what to do with it?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, but I can't say that in front of an audience.
Thomas, I've really enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed it. as much as I have. I want to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you enjoyed the show, and I hope you did, and if you haven't done so already, please go to my website, richardskipper.com, and sign my guest book with your thoughts about the show. That helps to boost me in other markets. I also want to let you all know that tomorrow afternoon at 5:30, I am going to be sitting down and chatting with Michael Riedel of the New York Post. And he has a new book out called Singular Sensations, which is celebrating the Broadway of the 90s. It's a very interesting, wonderful book. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. So what I want you to do today, I want you to go to your Facebook friends list. I want you to go to the 7th name that pops up, and I want you to order 2 copies of this book.
That's very sweet, Richard. Thank you. Can I just say, Richard, that if people do want to get it, the only way to get it is on Amazon. You go to Amazon.com and look up what do you do with the chocolate Jesus. Or you can go to my website, which is trquinn, QUINN.com.
But, as I was saying, get 2 copies of the book, keep one for yourself, and send one to the 7th friend on your list. I already know who I'm sending the book to. Now, as I end every show, I turn the stage over to you. Anything you want to say about anything we've discussed today, anything that we didn't discuss that you wish that we had, or if you just have some message that you want to put out to everyone at this time that we're living in. Anything you want to say. And again, Thomas, thank you so much. I love the book very much.
Thank you so much. No, the only message I would say that, we're living in some tough times right now between the COVID, between transition of presidents and all the controversy surrounding that. And I would just say that I think all of us would be helped if we practiced a little bit more humility in what we claimed were the great truths of life, and to understand that no matter how fervently we believe in something, that it is ultimately that. It's a belief. And that while it should flourish in your own heart and mind, you got to let everybody else have their own freedom to do the same.
Amen. That's worth an amen, don't you think?
I think that's worth an amen.
Thank you. Have a great day. Everyone make it a better tomorrow. Thank you.